Welcome back to the Bryan podcast. Once again, joined by Joe Chislett from KRITIKOS, and really excited to dive into our next topic, which is shared thinking. And it really builds on some of the skills we talked about with respect to judgment and kind of all the benefits that brings into your decision making framework. Shared thinking is going to be diving into more how do we communicate these decisions and thoughts that we've been working through in our own minds. So, Joe, how are you doing today, man?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I took a little elbow playing basketball this morning, so my mouth is a little wobbly on the words. I got a fat lip.
Okay.
Otherwise, fine. So
Okay. Well, like it doesn't show too much, so
I was concerned that the moneymaker was broken, but all I can do is talk, so we're good. But anyways, I'm excited to dive into shared thinking today, Joe, because it's so important for people to make great decisions. But then you're generally not working or living in the world by yourself and just in your mind. I think it's really important to be able to communicate with others. What are your decisions? What's gone into making that choice? And this concept of shared thinking is being able to share your thoughts and your judgments, right? So I'm excited for you to dive in. And I think where we want to start is based on your research and expertise and track record. This is generally an overlooked topic of critical thinking and kind of this whole kind of study, if you want to call it that. I suppose it is. Why is shared thinking overlooked, even though it is so important to be able to communicate the ideas?
yeah. I think, yeah, it's definitely true to say that it's been overlooked, and certainly I overlooked it when I used to teach critical thinking when I started out, and because the textbooks overlooked it. I think it's partly the academic tradition it comes from, where you're sort of analysing arguments, and you're doing it quite forensically, and you're just thinking about in this tradition of what's logical and what's not logical. But after a while, when I started to think, like often I'd set questions and tests, and people had to try and find out, like they had to identify unfair move someone was making in a conversation, or identify a straw man or an ad hominem or something like that. These kind of things where people are sort of like not really playing by the rules. Um, but I started to think it's almost like it's in danger of sort of turning into name calling, or sort of like holding up cards, like in soccer, like a yellow card, red card, like foul play. And so, okay, so you and identify a possible unfair move. But a more interesting question to me was like, well, why? Why is the person doing that? And this idea that you just sort of give people, you tell people what are fair and unfair moves in arguments, and then from then on they'll just argue completely fairly and rationally and reasonably for the rest of their lives, just seemed to be completely naive. It was missing the interactional side of people and why people are so desperate to win an argument. You know, and so I became so sort of interested in this idea that had sort of been overlooked, the sort of psychology, if you like, of how we share our thinking. That when I started off Kritikos, I was actually I was on a mission to rebrand critical thinking as critical discussion for a while, because I just saw something really important in this idea. And I was working in schools at the time, and schools were so obsessed with debating all the time. And debating's is obviously going to teach you some good skills, but essentially it's about winning. It's always about trying to win an argument rather than try and sort of get to the truth. And I thought, well, critical discussion is a sort of nicer way of looking at how we share our thinking in a way that we hope will sort of test our thinking, but improve our thinking, and between us, sort of arrive at a better place, a better idea, a more accurate view, something like that. So yeah, I went all in on critical discussion for a while. I was sort of now I see it as sort of an important part of thinking. But as you say, it's 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 essential, because no matter how good your thinking is, you could be the best thinker in the world, but if you can't communicate your thinking well with other people, then it's kind of irrelevant. And it is a slightly different skill, being
Yeah.
able to get other people on board and share your ideas with other people and not alienate them when you do disagree with them. Um, I think it can be sort of seen as a sort of, and for those reasons, it does get forgotten, but it's such an important part of who we are and how we think. I mean, I won't go into it today because it's a bit too heavy and technical, but there are some very interesting, convincing arguments, I think, that our whole ability to think and reason evolved from the social context of being amongst other people, these complex societies that we lived in, and the need to cooperate and communicate with people, needing to give people reasons to do that. I'm very persuaded by those arguments. So, for whatever reason, but just bring it right back to the bread and butter. We need, like you started off saying, you got your ideas, You need to share them with other people. And there are ways of doing that well and not so well, essentially. And that's, I thought, what we talk about.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into those examples or conversations of like when it goes right, when it goes wrong. I think I know I have a couple of stories I'm going to probably throw at you, but I do think that your point about winning an argument and the kind of the spirit and the intent going into a conversation is really important from like a starting baseline. I'm going in there to make sure that my point of view is the only one that comes out alive versus I'm going in there to, collaborate with the team and come up with the best collective decision where we all can get to where we want to go together. I think those are kind of that's the dichotomy that I'm feeling there. And there's one is kind of authoritarian to a degree, like I'm going to make sure that this happens no matter what at all costs. And you know, I, I have I'm gonna sidebar off on this, but I want to toss this out at you. The game of telephone is a good example of the intent and the spirit. So I think this is good because I think everyone's played the game, but the game of telephone is somebody at the beginning gets to say a little key phrase, and then the goal at the end is someone, passes through all the people and they get to repeat it. And in a kid's game, it's funny, the words get all messed up and all those things. But I think about that from a critical standpoint. That person at the beginning could go in there and try to have the phrase get messed up. That's their intent. And they could say something funny or very awkward or not common words with the intent that the other person's going to really mess it up versus they're going in there to make sure that the person at the end has the best odds at getting the phrase right and picking things that are common, they make sense, and they're collectively understood in the group. I've tossed that idea around quite a bit because it actually has a lot of nodes into AI, but this shared thinking and trying to hit the same target and finding that right outcome is, I think, such a challenge in life, business, and I think everyone will have an example they'll find with the topic. I've just kind of rambled for a little while, so why
Nice.
why don't you get into what is shared thinking and get the story moving?
Yeah, well, I mean, everything you said is spot on because it is. We are going to be talking a little bit about intent and human psychology and human interactions and dynamics. And I think an important point is to like whatever you do, it's got to. We've got to be sort of working with the grain of human nature. We can't redesign people completely, and I don't not in the business of even trying to do that. And in fact, some of the we don't necessarily want to take the adversarial element out altogether. There's a sense in which it can actually be a sort of feature rather than a bug. The fact that we are good at finding fault in other people's arguments, but better than we are in our own, means that when we get together, we can, like this is why you have peer review in science. You don't just have scientists just putting out their papers and talking about how wonderful all their findings are. It gets put to the put into the lake with all the sharks to attack it. I'm not suggesting that that's what a conversation should be like, but there's an extent to which some of these human dynamics and these aspects of human nature you can sort of use you can use them in a kind of positive way, is what I'm saying. So we're going to focus on so this idea of sharing thinking specifically, not just conversations generally, sharing thinking, and just a little link back to this idea of judgment. So, like last time we were talking about why I was saying why it's really helpful to be able to identify when judgments are happening, but we didn't really talk about how to make better judgments or improve them, sharpen them. And the simplest way to do that is to share them with other people because we are good at finding fault in each other's ideas. Um, so that's the basic idea. Like you do it to improve your own judgment, partly to test your judgments.
This week on two differing judgments was, you get a second opinion from a physician, right?
Mhm.
So you
Yes.
go in and one says, "Hey, you're fine," and this one says, "Hey, you should probably see this specialist." Those are
Mhm.
two separate judgments that have an element of risk for the patient, right? So the patient could take judgment one and just be like, "I'm fine. They said I'm okay." And then I get a second opinion, and then it's like, "Well, maybe we should look at that a little bit closer." That's the example that we gave last week.
Yes, and I guess what I'm trying to say in simple terms is that when you've got differing judgments, the implication is that one of you is wrong. or needs at least one of you needs to change, needs to correct their view, and which isn't really happening when you're sharing, sharing opinions is a bit more, well, that's my view, that's your view. You're not really sort of like, your views don't contradict each other in the same way. And if you look at it, like a true disagreement, ultimately must be about a matter of judgment, I would say, because if it's about matters of fact, well, you just check. Eventually, you'll just check, and one person's mistaken. But when you've got a genuine disagreement, it's going to be about, I'm sorry, I've said this already, it's going to be about a matter of judgment. The point is that when you've got disagreements about judgments, you've got, the implication is that at least one of you must be wrong. And this is why this is why sharing thinking is problematic, because it has that, it does have that implication that someone is wrong, and people don't like being wrong. So they like to be right. And so that's automatically going to sort of slightly, however coolly or calmly you try and have your discussion, it's automatically going to be carrying this threat, lurking threat. That humans, like, we are social beings, we're like kind of social creatures, and things that are very, very important commodities to us, like to live amongst other people, you've got to have a certain amount of self-esteem, confidence in yourself. But also, you've got to have a good reputation amongst other people. You've got to be thought of well by other people. And sort of appearing to know stuff and be right about things is a little kind of like a gold star on your sort of reputation. And if you want people to kind of cooperate with you and, look up to you and respect you, having knowledge and being right about the world is like something that's like a little kudos thing. So being shown that you're wrong about something suddenly is a threat a little bit to your sort of social standing, to your reputation. And anything that kind of threatens your reputation as a social being is a genuine threat. And that actually feels like, and particularly if you go back in time to sort of more primitive societies, it really was, it was a physical threat to your life. Because if you were ostracized from the tribe, that was it. You'd had it. You weren't going to survive out there. So like it was life or death being accepted. So how you're seen, and so this kind of need to be shown, to be seen to be right by other people, this kind of validation from the group. So that's one powerful thing that goes on. So when you're sharing thinking, as soon as you've got this suggestion that you're wrong, particularly if it's in a kind of public forum like online or social media, or in a meeting in front of other people, sort of socially deeming you that you're wrong about something, this very kind of primitive primal part of our brain kind of takes over, and we start to dissociate. The rational side and the emotional side start to split, and our thinking becomes really binary. And what's really fascinating is, and this is why Google got involved in it, because they are able to detect through sort of like monitoring online conversations. Apparently, this was true 7 or 8 years ago. Um, it was the best predictor of violent behavior was when people's language became more binary, became more absolute. And it was a sign that they're different parts of themselves were dissociating. And from what I was told, I've never really looked into this. Even things like, the sort of CIA and people will use this, monitoring terrorist kind of organizations, scanning their communications for language becoming binary was a predictor that something was going to happen. Uh,
What is binary language? Is that, I think yes or no is binary, but like I'm sure it's more
so,
complex than that. You have an example there?
yeah. So obviously, like any lack of nuance or hedging. So anything like absolutely, I'm right, you're wrong.
Mm,
Totally, definitely, 100%. Like there's an absolute. There's good is bad is right, wrong,
it's
true,
like you're
false.
not on my team anymore. Like you're on another team, so like you're against me because you're not with me type.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
that makes
that's
sense.
right. So
That's
that, yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So this is how a simple disagreement can sort of escalate, because just being wrong about one thing, you suddenly feel like you're under attack from this person,
yeah.
and so you want to then show them why they're wrong about other things, and you're right about other things, and you sort of build up this like edifice of whatever you want to call it, ammunition that you're using against the other person, and you don't see it as a critical sort of conversation to try and get to the truth. It's about conversation trying to save your reputation against someone else, against damage. And that's a highly emotional sort of situation to be in.
Yeah.
Um,
There
so
there's way too much, like, well, there's too many things going on in the world right now for that us to, like, not be addressing this, honestly. I feel like on our last episode, we talked about judgments being able to really make you less judgmental because you can understand that they're where they're coming from a little bit better,
uh
relax, let's not get the emotional side of it. But yeah, there's so much violence and people are just at each other's throats. Like it's crazy. So being like the communication between people is a huge indicator of online conversations, a great indicator of violence to come. That's really interesting. So shared thinking then, and being able to do your thinking and your conversations in a way that doesn't elicit that triggering effect to people to like team up or like get a you're not with me. I know
yeah,
we were going to talk a little bit about sharing judgment, sharing your thoughts, good and bad. So there's a lot of bad, like if you
yeah,
isolate people, make them feel threatened that they're wrong, they wall up. But yeah, like that's how I'm hearing all that. Am I on the
okay.
right track?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think that the danger is that if you sort of say, oh, it's all human nature to sort of like for disagreements to escalate and go tribal and that kind of thing, then, it's, you can, it's easy to just be, draw the pessimistic conclusion and just say, what's the point? What's the point in trying to talk and argue and reason with the other side or even try and have a critical discussion if it's always going to inevitably go up this chain? Um, but this is where we need to think a little bit about honestly and truthfully about humans and human nature, because I've only given part of the picture there. Part of the picture of a social creature is that we want to look like we know stuff and we're right about things, and we're a source of wisdom. We're a source of knowledge, not ignorance. Okay, but we also want to look reasonable and rational. It's very, very important if you're, because being a, species where cooperation is like it's off the scale compared to, other species, the kind of to be, you want to look like someone who's going to be, who you can rely on, trust, cooperate with, and things like that. And what's interesting is one of the worst things you can do in a conversation, worse actually than say you're wrong, is to say that you're being mad, you're being crazy, you're being irrational. That's almost more of an insult to people. And this is another reason, that conversations often go wrong, because it often feels like the other person's being crazy or irrational, because, like we said last time, if you're not seeing things as judgments, you see them as just plain wrong, and rather than, just a different take. Um, and also because our emotions escalate a little bit, and you get irritated and frustrated, and you sort of, you're just being, that's crazy. As soon as you sort of to say or insinuate that someone else is being irrational, that's the worst thing you can do. Because no one wants to cooperate with someone who is seen as like, unstable, irrational.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is we have a instinctive need to be seen to be right. Yes, but we also have an instinctive need to be seen to be reasonable and rational. So you can, at some point, if someone's so determined to look like they're right about something that they will dig their heels in to the point at which they're actually contradicting themselves against other things that are clearly true, they're going to start to look really foolish. It's possible to persuade someone simply by throwing enough reasons and evidence at them that they just going to look so. I mean, not everyone on Earth. We can think of one or two
Let,
examples
let,
out
let
there.
me let me interject real quick. There's a lot of people here in the States that I think need to hear what you're about to say, because I think there's a lot of people who are doing the mental gymnastics day in and day out to maintain a position that is so clearly, they have so much evidence and rational reasons and all these things, and they're just blatantly ignoring them because they want to maintain where they are and they want to be right. And I do think that they are consistently attacked online, and they're labeled as dumb and racist and terrible people, and like I assume that's as jarring to them as saying you're crazy, right? But yeah, that's driving people into the different camps over here.
Mm,
or the teams, and like there's so much rhetoric happening around it. And
well,
conversations
yeah.
I've had with people, everybody's like trying to find like how do we find common ground together? How do
Mm.
we how do we find those things that we want to align on? So I think what you're about to get into, and I totally got you off your track, but like this is ground zero stuff here in the States between the people.
But I think just just this is a kind of slightly technical point, but I want to try and keep things simple and like I want to try and keep, I was always going on about uncertainty, uncertainty, like it's about realizing that we don't know things. But actually, I've been thinking a lot about how actually I'm always looking for certainties. I do value certainties, and I want to try and find some basic, simple, but some truths that you can sort of can build on. And one of my kind of truths is that humans are a mixture of things. We're a blend. We're partly, we do listen to reasons, but we don't only listen to reasons. And we're going to I'll talk in a minute about how to sort of use that. But one thing that's not quite so simple, but it's a bit more complicated. This is a strange link, actually. But this whole idea of updating in a way, which is a kind of quite a rationalist way of talking about it. In a way, a way of sort of neutralizing being wrong, taking some of the emotiveness out of being wrong. If you say, well, rather than seeing myself as being wrong, I'm like updating, that makes it sound that's a more positive spin on sort of changing your mind. The first tip about disagreements, if you don't want them to escalate, is don't make it all about the disagreement. Get a relationship going first about other things as human beings. I'm sure that if these two people are massively polarized, whether it's about climate or politics or something or other, they started off by sharing stories about their families and their childhoods and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that this is one of the best ways of confronting like prejudice and racism and things like that. When you get people who actually go and spend some time with people, you know, from a different background, that's the best way to kind of like cure it. So, but don't make it all about the disagreement. Build some trust first. Once it does get onto try and find some common ground. Once it does get onto the disagreement, like try to remember what's at stake, like I've said for the other person all the time. So every concession that they're making, you've got to kind of like acknowledge that, and also making some concessions yourself because people tend to reciprocate. So if you say, I've noticed I've done this a lot in practice. If I go into a conversation where someone's really fixed and they've obviously got a different viewpoint from me, and I don't maybe like their viewpoint or want to get them to rethink, the first thing I start doing is I'm showing some vulnerability in my position. I go, oh yeah, you're right about that. And I've noticed that people after a while, they'll start saying, yeah, actually I might be. So, if you can make a concession, people also make a concession. That's a way that you can, that can be helpful, I think. Um, there's a nice phrase in this book. There's a really good book called Conflicted. I think it's got a different title in America, but the one I've got is called Conflicted by Ian Leslie. And a lot of my techniques are taken from that. He has really neat little chapter headings, like things like let go the rope. So it's not like a tug of war, trying to, and I'm sure you know this technique as a salesperson, like giving people the option of choosing an option when it's an option that you want. So it feels like they're empowered making the choice. Um,
Don't
there's
give
even a
away all my
phrase.
secrets over here, Joe.
Yeah, yeah. And thinking
No, no,
about,
no. You're right though.
they're
No, I mean it's something that pretty commonly comes up, right? When I'm thinking about how like I'm talking about closing a deal, right?
Mhm,
I spent a lot of time with the person. I've built up a relationship. I understand the current state, their future state, and I've given them an approach and an opportunity to get there. And that's typically what I'm selling is like improvements of systems or technology,
mhm,
or I'm taking you from where you are to where you want to go. That's a scary thing for businesses to say, yes, I'm going to make this change for my organization because like change is hard. So you have to kind of give them like the platter. It's like, well, we can make the step forward together, and you can trust that I know what I'm doing and that my team is capable of executing. So there's option one. There's you can do it on your own, right? We've talked about what you want to do. You know what you want to do. You go do it on your own, or you can kind of just stay here. So what ends up happening a lot of times in like the end of a sale is you've come to a conclusion with the customer about what they're trying to achieve. And there's table stakes that need to be met, but then there's generally like one or two things that get them to move. But they get their choice is go with somebody, go it alone, or do nothing. Those are the three choices. Doing nothing is always a choice. Firmly believe that. And, one of three wins. There's always 12 other vendors competing for the business. So it's who do they trust more to help them get to where they want to go? That's that's like a real sale. That's like helping a business transform versus like I want new socks and I go to Amazon, I click the thing and I buy it. That's transactional. Like selling is like really
Mm.
understanding and building into that. So the wisdom, the cooperation, the trust, that's super important for salespeople.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, in a way, like when you're sort of sharing, when you're sharing thinking and you're putting forward your judgment, and if you're in a one that you kind of would like other people to accept, you are selling. You're getting someone to buy, literally, sort of, well, not literally, in the sense that figuratively, you're getting them to buy into an idea. You're getting them to invest in something, take a risk, put down some beliefs that they hold, pick up a new one, walk into the world with this new belief that they've acquired. It sort of is a product in a way. Is the analogies work very, very well, and how much and how heavily to buy into an idea, and people are naturally cautious as customers of ideas. They're going to be, and it's sensible to be. It's prudent. You don't want to just buy every idea, to pay for every idea that that you come across. Some you want to reject, and so that natural the process is that a salesperson encounters is exactly what's going on really with ideas, and I think that. And an obvious point that just occurred to me while you were speaking that I hadn't made. It's just maybe I had, but is just people need validation for like the reasons we were saying earlier. And just like having people sort of saying or implying that you're wrong about things it makes you feel sort of invalidated and can increase the threat state. So doing what you can to validate people and say, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I really agree with that. Oh, wow, hadn't thought of that. That's that's really powerful. The only trouble is people can smell in authenticity. So it's got to be sort of, it's got to be genuine. And I think sometimes rather than saying that's great, sometimes that's interesting is more effective because it's more plausible that you're going to find something interesting than you're going to find it amazing. And actually, we quite want to be interesting, don't we, into other people? So if someone's saying that's interesting is quite flattering. But yeah, something to validate the other person. There's a little anecdote, the documentary I was watching about the former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who was he was whatever people may think of him, he was phenomenally successful, unbelievably successful. Like he took the Labour Party that hadn't been in power for years and years, this landslide victory, won like 3 elections in a row, ended up having to give it. He was just kept winning, even after doing these really unpopular things like going to war with George Bush and Iraq and everything, which the country were generally against. He still won the next election. He had this. He was incredibly, incredibly persuasive. The thing with Tony was that everyone, whoever went to talk to him, always came away thinking he'd agreed with them. whoever, whoever, Whatever different points of view they had, he had that kind of way. And of course, he didn't really, but he obviously had that super way of going. He must have validated the hell out of people to have got them to, so that persuade. It's an obvious thing. What I mean, this is a big topic in itself, but like people are so desperate to sort of appear tough and kind of like strong that, you know, to the extent that they end up rubbing people up the wrong way, they don't get people on side, and also they look foolish.
I think there's like 3 episodes in here probably, but
Mhm.
the I think we made some really awesome points, and highlighted a bunch of reasons why being able to communicate something that is high stakes, has risks, thoughts and opinions are different between people, that there's an approach in here that is consistently proven to help de-escalate and to allow somebody to move a conversation forward rather than to separate and divide further, right? So you mentioned a couple of things along the way where, hey, go in there with some things you're willing to not be 100% certain on. Be the first one to concede and also allow the other person to have an opinion and validate and hear their opinion is really important because people just generally want to feel heard. I think I've succeeded in my career because I took some courses on active listening, right? And just allowing someone to really hear or explain their point of view, right or wrong. And this is a skill, being able to repeat back what you heard in a way, in the language that they gave it to you, and truly understand and can make that connection. That's the only reason I've actually been good at sales and management. So I think what we talked about today, it did meander in different places, but really highlights just the overall impact that being mindful about how you're having a conversation with somebody in a challenging situation that has risks, that a judgment's really going to be applied. Like, you can be so more effective in whatever change you're trying to achieve. These are tactics and mechanics that, this is psychology. This is how humans think. This is how they react to certain things. And like, I hope that more people that are listening to us are of the, I want to do good in the world. And these are skills that I want to be able to bring into my environment, right? We can have one conversation at a time. Like, we're not changing everything like with the wave of a magic wand. It's more people with the skills, with the abilities to process and have these conversations, Joe, is where I think that change actually can move in a good direction. Nothing's ever going to move forward until people are able to have difficult conversations where people can align towards a better outcome. And just, it seems like step one in this is like accepting that we're going to have some difficult conversations, and that I'm going to have to be willing to be wrong and walk in and be both humble to that point and confident that your point of view, your opinion will be both validated and respected by the other person.
I mean, I know you're winding up and you're doing it really well, and I feel like we probably shouldn't say any more at this point. You made some great points there, and I think this idea that in a way I've been trying to avoid talking about ways to avoid conflict, but I meant sort of avoid escalation and yeah, I think you're absolutely right that this kind of critical discussion thing is actually, it brings out the best in ourselves when we do disagree and we do, and some of the conversations are slightly difficult. It's a point that's made very, very beautifully in this book, Conflicted.
Yeah.
Um, Subtitle, Why Arguments Are Tearing Us Apart and How They Can Bring Us Together. But yeah, like the fact that these good things come out of the conflicts and the disagreements as well. So it's not like we want to avoid them altogether. But of course, agreeing too much can also be a problem. Um, and that's something else I sometimes talk about, but that'll have to be for another time. I just thought that the way you were packaging stuff was really nice. I just thought there was almost the beginnings of a little framework coming out there when you said about first, going into work out what things you are prepared, you're just not going to budge. You're absolutely sure of, and which things you may be prepared to make concession on, and then being the first person to make the concession that's a really nice little framework to go in with. I think that just a couple of things that occurred to me while you were saying that, like I already said, that you make a concession, people tend to reciprocate, so it has
Mhm.
that. It's seen as a sign of weakness, but I'm sort of suggesting that it's a kind of false strength not to make any concessions, because you're actually you're not going to get them to concede anything, which doesn't help you. Also, making a concession has the advantage of making you appear reasonable and rational. Like we said earlier, that's another thing that people, if you want to get people to trust and cooperate with you, etc., that's good. And I think connected to that, I was thinking that in a way, when you're having these disagreements with people, people need to feel confident that the game that you're playing is the same game they're playing. And what I mean by that is, you don't often go into a conversation, right, I'm going to make mincemeat of you. Here we go. We go in saying, let's just talk about it, right? And share our views. But we say that, but we might be going in thinking, actually, I'm going to show them why I'm right and they're wrong. And the other person knows that, and the other person hears this. I'm thinking particularly on cases where you've got quite, polarized thinking, and the other person thinks, I know you're saying you're being all nice, saying you're going to listen to my point of view, but you're really going to actually be attacking me. I know it. It's actually a war. You're pretending we're being nice, but it's a war. So as soon as you start making concessions, then you're being good to your word, and you're starting to act like you said, let's go into a conversation and see and try and test our viewpoints. And if you start making concessions, then you're showing that you're doing that, and that will help them to trust you. It's quite disarming. because the
Yeah.
person is going to go, oh, right. So they said they want to just discuss it and find out what's right. And they're already making some changes to what they say. Maybe I can trust them that maybe this isn't a hidden wall, you know? Um, so that's probably a long way of making quite a simple point, but
All right. I'm just going to bring it home then. So like, we we talked about a whole bunch of different things today, and I'm really just continually energized by the conversations. Hopefully, y'all did as well. Found this interesting and see the same things that I see, and also are really interested in like developing the skill. Right, whether you're a salesperson, trying to be better about communicating with customers and resonating with their points of view, be more empathetic, or helping someone navigate a difficult conversation as a manager, or just want to clean up social media some way, somehow using these skills. Like there's so much stuff going on here that once it becomes that kind of mode of operation for your thought process, and that's what Joe teaches, a whole mental framework and how to take your critical thinking to a whole different level. So thanks, Joe, for joining. If you're watching, like, follow, subscribe, all the things, and share it with some friends. Like, I think this is a benefit of the skills and conversations here benefit the group. And I think we need more people to see this information and this type of narrative and understand that there's a path. Because I do think there's a lot of people who are looking for that these days. So Joe, I think what you do is amazing, and I'm excited that we get to share it. And for the 12 people that watch this thing every week, hopefully we can get it to 20. So,
yeah,
anyways,
okay.
more people need to see
Yeah.
it. I'll figure out how to get that amplified out. But yeah, I appreciate your time, and we're we have lots of more things to talk about on the next episode, I'm sure. So, looking forward to more conversations.